Welcome to The Hill's Coronavirus Report. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Each day we are interviewing consequential international, national, and state leaders in the battle against the coronavirus. Just yesterday we heard more tough news for the domestic economy as first quarter GDP fell by 4.8%, more than 1 point above the expected contraction. Today, new jobs numbers reveal 3.8 million more Americans have filed for unemployment, bringing claims to more than 30 million in 6 weeks. Numbers like that have politicians, businesses, and regular citizens thinking, and many chomping at the bit about how and when to open the economy. Small business owners are among those who've taken a huge hit. Designed for them, PPP funds ran out, and Congress had to move to replenish the coffers. My guest today wants to reopen the economy as soon as possible. He says he's concerned about the loss of the American way of life, noting that, quote, "It's hyperbolic to say that the only choices before us are the two corner solutions, no economy or widespread casualties. We can use the best of biology and economics to enable us as much of the economy to operate as possible while we work to minimize disease transmission." He was former small business owner himself, and he now serves as the vice-ranking member of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets. Joining me now is Congressman Trey Hollingsworth. He represents Indiana's 9th Congressional District. Congressman, thanks so much for joining me. Let's get to this issue of where the right equilibrium is between what you see as, a public health standard we should meet and getting the economy going. How are you approaching this? You've been out there on that, and I'd love to hear how you're describing it to people.
Steve, you've hit the nail on the head. We have got to find the right equilibrium, the right position where we mitigate and minimize the risk, especially to our ultra-susceptible populations, while still enabling and empowering Americans to get back to as much of their normal way of life as possible. What I hear from Hoosier businesses, what I hear from Hoosiers all the way across the district, and Americans, frankly, all the way across the country, is that they don't want more handouts. They want the opportunity to begin rebuilding their future. They want the opportunity to get their freedoms back, the opportunity to go back to churches and synagogues, the opportunity to create a better future for themselves and a better future for America. And as you well said, we have to find a way forward, even in these challenging circumstances, by using the best of what we know from our biological sciences, but also from our social sciences like economics as well, to minimize and mitigate risk while still enabling and empowering the economy, and as much of it as we can, at least, to move forward.
Now, I listened to Elon Musk's conference call yesterday for the Tesla earnings, and he broke out into a bit of a tirade. He said, these stay-at-home orders are fascist, and it's not the America that he wanted to move to, lots of other expletives. And so clearly, I think whether it's Elon Musk or anyone, there are folks wanting to chomp at the bit, wanting to be out there. The question is, this is a kind of nefarious disease, a nefarious virus that people don't see and don't feel until it hits them. And so how do we get that right? Because this is where the command economy parts of this have been so criticized, but why people are saying, hey, you've got to listen to the scientists because you don't know how bad this can be.
Steve, you are exactly right. We need to listen to the scientists, but what we need to develop from the scientists is a rubric of those populations that are most susceptible and those populations that are least susceptible. Those industries that have the most contact, those industries that have the least contact, those geographies that are most likely to have a high incidence rate of infection, and those geographies that are having a low incidence rate of infection. I absolutely believe that the shelter-in-place orders put in place a month ago made sense to flatten the curve, made sense to delay the onset of significant healthcare capacity consumption by COVID patients. But shelter-in-place is not a long-term strategy. The long-term strategy should derive from real and material scientific advancement, both in biologically pushing back against this disease, antivirals. We've seen some great news on that in the past few weeks, obviously continue with the vaccine, but also ensuring that we talk about those people that are least susceptible. How do we get them back to work? Those industries where there's less contact, how do we get them back engaged? Those geographies where there's less incidence rate, how do we get them back to more of their normal life? We don't have to say to the American people, all of you need to stay in your homes living healthily, but not necessarily happily, or there'll be widespread casualties from coast to coast. What we should tell them is, this is a challenging situation. We have the best biologists in the world. We have the best economists in the world. And we are going to get the most amount of people back to the most amount of their normal life and the normal economy as possible, while keeping the susceptible populations as safe as possible, while minimizing transmissions, even while we do that.
So take your congressman hat off for a minute and imagine yourself back in your old job. As I understand it, you had an aluminum manufacturing small business, something along those lines. How would you go about doing it if you were back in that role of running that company?
Well, it's a great question, right? The first thing that we need from government is certainty. What are the rules of the road? What are the best practices? We need the CDC. We need others to come out and say, here's the best practices for how to approach getting back to work. That certainty is really, really important. And I think we've seen some firms that are taking what they know already and beginning to develop protocols on how they're going to keep their employees safe. It includes things like wearing a mask anytime that you're indoors and in and around people, having still virtual conferences, even if you're in the same building, even if you're in the same room, having virtual conferences versus getting close together. It includes temperature checks for everyone who walks through the door. It includes extra rigorous cleaning every single night. It includes staggering shifts, so we have fewer people in office buildings, fewer people in factories at any given point in time. All of these can contribute to lowering that transmission mechanism. It also includes, by the way, ensuring that those older populations, which by and large have been more susceptible, that they continue to telework while we bring younger populations and their counterparts in to continue work inside the office or inside the factory at the same time. These are all parts of a solution. We need the private sector to continue to innovate and develop biological cures, biological treatments, but also the best practices to biologically minimize the transmission between people.
Now, Congressman, I know you probably watch the presidents and vice president, I can't tell who's in charge anymore, of the daily coronavirus briefings. And the issue about testing has become kind of a blur for me. Where does, as a person in your community and talking every day to small businesses and your constituents, but also as a member of Congress, can you help me understand where we are at with getting the kind of omnipresent and regular and predictable testing foundation that everyone says we need to proceed?
You know, Steve, I'm so glad you are really, really thoughtful about this issue to say it is getting muddled. We're talking about all different types of tests at the same time, all different manner by which of getting results. There are two separate tests that need to happen at the same time, and we have to build capacity for, right? The first test is testing to see if you have the actual disease, a diagnostic test to determine if you have the disease. What we have struggled with is how long it takes to get the result to that. We've seen some tremendous innovations that have brought those results in very, very short amount of time, so that if you go and get a test, you can know in the next hour, in the next 2 hours, in the next day, whether you have it and whether you need to quarantine yourself, whether you need to stay away from other people. That type of test we need as robustly and as all the way across the country to ensure that anyone who shows the first sign of symptoms can find out immediately whether they have the disease, and hopefully immediately after that begin to take antivirals to shorten the length of recovery and also lessen the severity of the disease. That's really important to making sure that those who are sick know it, can take something, and can stay away from other people. That's one big testing category that we've done a good job of ramping up. We can do even better. I know the president said he wants to get to the point where we're doing 5 million a day. We've reached the max of doing 314,000 a day, roughly. That is more than any other country around the world, but we are going to continue to expand that. We've got a lot of locations in district that are just stepping up and starting their more robust testing as well, local Walmarts, at local community colleges, et cetera. That's one big area of testing. The second big area of testing is we need to find out where this is in our community, right? Right now, you have to show symptoms, walk through a physician's door, prove to that physician that you've shown symptoms, then you get tested. But the big thing we need to transition to is let's go find this in our communities. We need to start testing out there for who has this but is asymptomatic, who has had it in the last couple of months and is not likely to get reinfected. Once we know the underlying incidence rate, not just of the sick population, but in the general population, we can begin to understand the trajectory of any potential outbreak going forward. That is critical going forward to ensure that we allow the right geographies, the right populations to get back to work without risking a larger scale epidemic. The last thing I'll say about testing, and this is really, really important, I think frequently missed by many, is this is not something that we should just do for the next month, the next 2 months, the next 3 months. But until we have a vaccine that is shown to be efficacious, we have to continue our sentinel testing program. We need to ensure that in the fall, should this coronavirus resurge like many other coronaviruses do, we need to ensure that we catch it when there are 10 people, when there are 12 people, when there are 20 people, not when there are 2,000, 10,000, 20,000 people. So ongoing, rigorous testing where you can go as soon as you show symptoms and get a diagnostic test, or alternatively, where just as a part of your normal outreach to your primary care physician, they automatically give you a test in the fall so that we constantly have surveillance testing going on in the background to find any potential infection when it is small in the population. Those three forms of testing are really, really important, but very different. And I think that's frequently getting lost in the media and in some of the press conferences as they talk about different types of testing.
You know, one of the other areas that I've been struggling with and trying to figure out is how basically trust gets renegotiated in the workplace. And if you were back in Washington and your team was, here, there'd be two different lobbying groups. One of the lobbying groups would come up and say, you need to protect us as employers from liability about health in the workplace and what goes on. So there are efforts out there right now to kind of reconfigure what that liability situation might look like. On the employee side, we've provided unemployment insurance, certain PPE funds and whatnot to go out in the care pack stimulus package to support workers that were furloughed and unemployed. But I guess there's an effort to say if they are asked to come back to work and they don't feel like they're ready or they don't want to go, then they lose their unemployment. So it's an interesting tug of war about how to renegotiate that space. And I'd love to get your thoughts again on what the right equilibrium is between those.
That's another great question, Steve, because this is really, really important. So many of the businesses across the district are not just worried about how they get through this shut-in order, how they get through all these closure orders, but also how do they reopen? And how do they rehire employees? How do they protect the employees they care about so much? But how do they also incentivize those employees to come back? Now, what I hear from hardworking Hoosiers all the way across the district is they don't want more handouts. They want the opportunity to create a better future for themselves, but they want to do it safely. And what I hear from employers is the same thing. They want to be able to hand their employees a check. Not a government check, but a check because those employees created value for that business's customers, but they want to do it in a safe manner. And we've got to find that equilibrium. Now, you know what I believe, Steve? I believe that Washington should set an example. That's why we should be in Washington as members of Congress doing the things that Fauci and other leaders have said is important to minimizing transmission, but also demonstrating to the American people that we can work our way through this. We can get through this. We can find that equilibrium. And Washington should be a leader on this. We need members of Congress showing up and saying, yes, I'll wear a mask. Yes, I'll stay more than 6 feet away from other individuals, but we can get work done. We can have hearings. We can have debate on the floor. We can meaningfully move forward the American people and the American government while still protecting congressmen, while still protecting America from another outbreak. I think we should be leading by example on this to find that equilibrium that you so articulately asked about.
I think we're right down to the last minute here, but I think one of the things that's been interesting in this is, my family's from Oklahoma. You kind of talk to people out there about how they see Washington right now, and, it doesn't look that great to them. They see people like governors and mayors. They see heroes on the front line, healthcare workers. Heroism is not being hung on D.C. right now. It's emerging in other places. And I'm wondering, given what you just said, who do you see as the heroes in this time?
Steve, the reality is I go around the district and talk to people all the time. Now, it's been virtually, it's been over the phone over the last month or so, but I have never once in any of my town halls, in any of my meetings, in any of my roundtables, I have never once heard somebody respond when I ask the question, where is the greatness of America? What creates America's greatness? I have never once heard anybody, whether they're in elementary school or whether it's a senior citizens group in a nursing home, them say it's 535 politicians in D.C. Nobody thinks that Washington is the reason this country is great. What I hear from people is that it is hardworking Americans getting up every single day, doing their jobs, creating their better futures, leading their churches, leading their communities, helping out in healthcare, giving of their time to help our senior citizens. That is what makes this country great. It is what has always made this country great. In this crisis, that has come to the forefront as our healthcare heroes have stepped up and said, I will stand between America and a widespread epidemic. as our firefighters, our police officers do what they can to get food to our senior citizens so that they don't have to get out and risk it themselves. I've seen unbelievable acts of small businesses that have stopped making alcohol and started making hand sanitizer and giving that away. We have seen tremendous examples of Americans stepping up. And it is what has made this country great for 240 years. And what will make this country great for the next 240 years is those Americans, generation after generation, continuing to step up in spite, not because of, but in spite of what they see in Washington, D.C.
Well, really appreciate your time and your thoughts, your observations out in Indiana. Trey Hollingsworth, thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you back in Washington. And thank you to all of you for joining me today. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.